The true nature of progress is not linear. Progress is evolutionary. It comes in a progression of distinct generations, each of which is punctuated with a jump. And it's these jumps that we describe as disruption. And the ultimate disruption is the paradigm shift. And most sectors, but in particular the medical device sector at the moment, is going through a seismic shift. We're witnessing the unraveling of the product manufacturing business model that so much of the foreign direct investment success this country has been built upon, and the emergence of a product-enabled service business model. And it is this product-enabled service business model, why it is the way it is, how it operates, why it's significant, and what it means for Ireland, that I want to talk about today. Right? So the mental model that I would like you to leave with is to have a picture of what this shift from product manufacturing to product-enabled service looks like. My name is Damian Costello. I'm Head of Innovation in the Synecco Medical Device Design and Manufacturing Group. My primary role is managing partner of Decode Innovation, which is the group's strategy and transformation business. And I'm a specialist in disruption dynamics. I've been involved in product development and innovation for 25 years now, and while my primary focus is in medtech, I have a track record in energy, automotive, ICT, fintech, pharma. So I hope that this particular presentation has relevance across all sectors. What I'd like you to get from today is some theory to put this mental model in context, a multi-generational parable to illustrate how it works, and hopefully the main thing that you get out of this is a sense that Ireland really is positioned to be the big winner in this paradigm change. So a lot of my theory goes back to Clayton Christensen's seminal work on disruption, the innovator's dilemma, that's 20 years old this year. And Christensen tells us that disruption can only occur as the existing orthodoxy reaches its peak. He tells us that a new generation performs relatively poorly at first. The steam engineers who were breaking land speed records scoffed at the digital shunting cars that operated in the yard. But there's always something about this new generation that is capable of redefining the entire space. And the issue is, for most large organizations, that in disruptive times, you need to go backwards to go forwards. And that's not something that's taught on any MBA course. It's not something that shareholders will tolerate in many large organizations. But the problem is, when you are facing disruption, that if you persist with the logic, if you persist with best practice, you will go the way of the typewriter manufacturer. And nobody at this stage wants to visit typewriter land. The problem with these discontinuous jumps is they seem counterintuitive, but don't mistake the fact that they appear counterintuitive with the idea that this period might be illogical. There is a logic going on behind the scenes, and that's one of the things that I want to illustrate today. And the first thing that throws people is the fact that often the first of a new generation comes disguised as the last of an old generation for lots of reasons. But if you think about the first generation of digital music, it came on a plastic circular disc. Right? This led the music industry into believing that their supply chain, which was very good at moving around bits of plastic, was secure. But the move from analog to digital is never about the physical devices. It's always about the data and the irresistible control that you can leverage when you have enough of it. I was involved in digital rights management around the time that the music industry was being attacked by Steve Jobs. And they knew what was coming. They knew exactly what he was doing, but they had no credible defense against that form of attack. And there lies my first warning, and that is the medtech industry, clean tech, fintech industry has very little time to figure out its own defense. You may ask, why bother with this product-enabled service model? Well, in the shift from analog to digital, the early mobile phones looked and seemed to work in a very similar fashion to the late portable phones. You have to take a step backwards to see the difference between these two devices, to start to understand the fundamental difference. But more than the technology, more than the physical device, the biggest difference between these two devices is in the economics behind them, is in the business model behind them. In the 70s, if you had a telephone, you would have been paying line rental. You'd have been paying for your share of the infrastructure. You'd have been paying device or instrument rental. But you would have used this instrument as little as possible. Now, that pyramid has inverted. While the infrastructural piece may, in real terms, be similar, right? The base of the old pyramid is the point of the new pyramid. There's an explosion in the number and value of devices, and that's nothing compared to the explosion in the number and value of services being leveraged by these devices. So therein lies the windfall here. Digitization always represents a windfall for somebody. This is driven by, and some of the earlier speakers spoke about the Internet of Things. This is driven by the Internet of Things. And the thing to remember about the Internet of Things is it means that the inherent efficiencies of digitization that led to the demise of all of these industries and the emergence of these new global giants, that those were the easily digitizable industries. What's happening now is you can apply sensor and communications technologies to pretty much anything. So now every industry is digitizable. And why should you be interested in this? Is because everybody who is anybody is interested in this. Estimates suggest that this industry will be worth 6.5 trillion in a few short years. And that medtech is going to get the largest share of that. So that's quite a big pot that we're all playing for. And my second warning here is that there are strangers out there already targeting our windfall, and if we're not very careful, they will take it off us the way they took it off the music industry. Another dynamic to understand is we can all sort of picture the type of appliances that exist before the advent of electricity. And if you think about it, there was a period where there was a kettle and there was an electric kettle. There was a gas lamp and there was an electric light bulb. But somewhere along the line, a line got drawn. And things that were impossible even to conceive of in the period before electricity became real and created entire industries of their own. And that is the promise of the paradigm shift. That's why it's worth pursuing. And if you take that logic and apply it to the medtech sector, before digital medtech, medical device companies sold to hospitals. In this early phase that we're going through at the moment, they're building e-commerce platforms. They reached out to clinicians and key opinion leaders. Now they deal with social media. They had distribution partners. Now they can use FedEx and DHL. And where they were concerned about customer service, now the issue is user experience. But don't be fooled by this, because this is just the table stakes. This just gets you a start. What's more important is what's impossible without digital. Where is this all going? What does this mean? And where it is going is towards proper outcome-based reimbursement. And outcome-based reimbursement means the powers that be pay for the outcomes, not for the time or material that went into delivering those outcomes. That means that organizations, medical device companies, are going to have to measure the real quality of life benefits that their intervention delivered. But it will start to facilitate pay-per-use device finance models, and it will contribute to this holy grail that we're all focusing on, this holistic, personalized, precision healthcare that needs to happen, and needs to happen at a cost basis that society can deal with. So that's the new game. That's the game that we all should be focused on. And Ireland should be very good at this. So before I bring you through the story, the parable that pulls all this together, there's one other thing that I want to talk about. Somebody else, I think Bernie mentioned it earlier, she talked about design thinking. We use design thinking to ensure that our solutions are fully thought out, that they're fully rounded. And we follow the three normal vectors of design thinking. Customer desirability, do people actually want it? Commercial viability, can we make money on it? Technical feasibility, can we actually do it? But we add, and we would suggest that other industries think about this as well, we add a third vector to our design thinking philosophy, and that is regulatory suitability. And by regulatory suitability, we don't just mean the regulators, the FDA, we also mean the reimbursement, the payers, and the rules and regulations that they use, general commercial law, patent law, ethics, and all of the other rules that you need to adhere to be a member of a particular sector. And in medical devices, customer desirability has a particular poignance. Right? And if you think about things like mobility as a population ages, independence, dignity, and the challenges that issues with those bring, sense of isolation, fear, pain. And then you realize that these issues will eventually impact somebody that we love. So there's a very personal aspect to working in medical devices. So if we think about the current approach, let me introduce to you a hypothetical orthopedic company called OrthoWow. And OrthoWow have their Hiptastic 3000, which is a current generation product. And a current generation product means the procedure costs approximately $50,000. It takes a couple of hours of theater and surgeon time. The manufacturer gets about $5,000 for the device, and it's expected to have a 15 to 20-year lifespan. If we were to superimpose a product-enabled service model onto that organization, what might that look like? Well, the most relevant model I can think of was developed in the 1980s by Rolls-Royce. It was called Power by the Hour. And Power by the Hour meant that instead of selling jet engines, they provided engine power as a service. And this created a monumental shift in aviation economics. A shift that led, I think, to certainly drive the growth of low fares airlines. I always find it ironic that such a prestigious brand brought us and people like Ryanair. But the health economics issue was, instead of having to pay $20 million for an airframe and $20 million for engines and then have to set up a complete validated maintenance facility, you could just buy the airframe and go to Rolls-Royce and they would rent you the engines and you pay per use on the engines. So your risk model was totally different. So it more than halved the barrier to entry, and it came along just as Herb Kelleher's model was Southwest Airlines was starting to take off, and I believe it's one of the reasons that low fares airlines were as successful as they were. But another thing happened, that when you are manufacturing engines and maintaining them yourselves, you have a very different approach to maintenance costs than when you were just handing it over to somebody else to pay for it. So now you start to build into your innovation process how you manage the service. So service innovation becomes a key element. So the first thing they would have done is they would have done incremental improvements on their existing technology. So they would put in sensors and new materials to reduce their maintenance overheads and increase intervals. But the big value came in the product innovation in the next generation after they realized all of this, where they started to build in these economies into the engine design itself. So what might that look like for our orthopedic company? Well, the first thing, if this model was to play out, and it's one of many models that may play out, is they could sell the resultant quality of life as a service rather than selling their devices. The health economics, if it was to follow the same model, would see the emergence of no-frills hip clinics that would spring up to just specialize in pushing people through. And with changes in technology, they may not even have the surgeon in the clinic. The surgeon may be working robotically from some central location, and they don't have to leave their house in Malibu to deliver surgery in somewhere less attractive than Malibu. The other thing that would start to happen is that as the franchise exploded and as more and more of these clinics emerged, they would become the biggest single consumer for these type of products. And as the big consumer, they can press for the real benefits that they want. So they would start looking for things that would move them towards the value proposition that came from minimally invasive surgery. The shift from the expensive labor and real estate cost of operating in an operating theater with a surgeon to operating in the cath lab with a radiologist. So they would want the shift to occur so that it would be cheaper to install these devices. And the next thing that would happen is they would move into a cycle of product innovation where the durability and speed of insertion, a whole lot of other things that matter to them emerged. So let's assume OrthoWow applied that. Their scenario would be to follow a strategy of mobility as a service. And mobility as a service means they bring out their IntelliHip 4000. And the IntelliHip 4000 adds Internet of Things sensors and communications. And that means they can now move to a service revenue. They can now have a subscription model. They can offer the mobility rather than sell the device. That means the procedure cost would drop by the price of the device. And if they were to get $10 to $20 per week for the mobility that they offer, depending on whether the person was running marathons after the device or not, their business model would change significantly. So from a customer perspective, they get peace of mind, they get feedback on issues. From a regulatory perspective, politics and political will is what is driven by health economics. And this would herald the first iteration of true outcome-based reimbursement. The Internet of Things, data handling, data protection, these are all viable in other sectors at the moment. And the commercial viability of this, hospital cash flow would be altered. The manufacturer would have the potential over 20 years to earn 4 times the price of the device. But the manufacturers would have to change their business model. They'd have to finance up front, so they'd have to create their own banks in the way that the car companies did over the last number of years. The next generation would go back into the systems innovation. And in Gen 3, they will launch their SpeedyHip 3000, which is now a minimally invasive product. It takes 15 minutes to put in, and it can be done by an orthopedic technician. Because it saves so much money, we've lobbied to get some more money in the reimbursement, and the procedure cost has been slashed. What this means from a customer perspective is that people will regain mobility sooner, because with a 15-minute procedure and they can be back on the golf course on Monday morning, they're not going to wait until they're crippled before they get this procedure. Active patients have fewer general health issues, and increased mobility will increase societal productivity. It will require significant technical breakthroughs, but this is a good thing because that will involve valuable and defendable intellectual property. And while the hospital costs have crashed, outcomes have improved, and the manufacturers might be getting a little bit more over the long term if they really deliver on the outcome promise. The real shift occurs when you go back to full and proper product innovation. So in the 4th generation, OrthoWow launches their WonderHip 6000. And it is now a 50-year hip. Because if you go in 50 minutes and you get your hip early, and if you have another 40, 50, 60 years left in your life expectancy, you don't want to have 3 hips in the rest of your life. You want it done, finished, and over. You cannot deliver a 50-year hip through mechanical engineering. Right? You have to deliver it through a full interdisciplinary approach to the physiology and the bone density, and a whole load of other things have to come into play. And that all has to be coordinated, and can only be coordinated in a digital world. But because you're working on this interdisciplinary benefit, you have all of these new opportunities for data revenue. This iteration sees more people regain their mobility sooner and once and for all. From a regulatory perspective, it really starts to drive personalized healthcare. The litigation is reduced because the tracking of the device and the tracking of the procedure, it's very clear to know who's at fault if something goes wrong. From a technology perspective, it now requires several technology breakthroughs, and these technology breakthroughs all add up to more intellectual property. While the volumes are down, the value per device has now shot through by an order of magnitude, right? And that's not counting the data revenue that may emerge. So that's how this windfall will be realized over the next 10, 15 years. And what's really happening there in outcome-based reimbursement is you're seeing an innovation-driven transfer of value from labor and real estate to device functionality and service revenue. And this will lead to a system that rewards innovation, because currently, the medical device industry does not reward innovation in a way that drives this sort of closed-loop positive feedback approach. So the model that I'd like you to take away is that if you apply a product-enabled service model to any sector and any organization, take an orthopedic company. I'm doing this because currently I'm not working with any orthopedic company, so I'm not giving anything away. Right? I can't tell you what the other industries are doing. But you'll have the current generation, and right now you can see how this logic can project the next 3 generations and the next 4 generations and the next 3 significant disruptions coming in an industry. And in a world of digitally enhanced, product-enabled service models, such as mobility as a service, as outlined here, Ireland has a distinct advantage, unlike anything we've enjoyed before. We have all of the different companies, from all of the leading FDI companies, from all of the different industries that need to come together to make this happen, all exist on one small island. I would suggest that never before has our fate been in our own hands to the extent that it is right now. And just to give you an example quickly, and I know I'm over time, to give you an example quickly, we worked before Christmas with a medical device company. They were an engineering center of excellence for a particular, let's call it a widget. The company announced that they were going to make smart widgets. That came to the attention of a US site with much more political clout, who were already making smart devices, who said, well, let us make the smart widget. So the risk there was that if the US site who understood smart technology won the business, our client's widget expertise would have been siphoned off to the core, and their position as a centre of excellence would have been seriously undermined. We helped them pitch Ireland as a medtech hub with the proper support ecosystem available, and just before Christmas, the Irish site won the project lock, stock and barrel. And as a result, if we do a good job on this project, they will have secured their mandate for the decade to come. So the point here is that if you embrace smart technology in this fashion, you get to the opportunity to double your mandate. But if you ignore it, you will watch your value proposition halved. There is no standing still in this scenario. And the beauty of operating in the medical device space is that the people that you help may well be your own loved ones. Thank you.